I'll hand it over to you, Chris.
Oh, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. I hope you can all hear me well.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so my name's Chris Marie Connors. I work for the Mount Isa Family Support Service and Neighbourhood Centre. I've been there for 7 years. The service itself has been in the community for 30 years in its present form, and we submitted an application to the Commission to have some comments, basically to sort of reflect what we feel needs to be done in our community. So we weren't speaking for the whole state or trying to bring about sweeping reforms across the state. It's really, for us, we applaud the Queensland Government on adopting a place-based approach to developing communities, and we think that that's a really good idea, that local people understand the local issues and have the best chance of finding the best solutions for their community. I wasn't really made aware of what the format was. Commissioners, would you like me to go through my submission or speak to other general?
Chris, you've got 15 to 20 minutes. It's Commissioner Kim Wood here to really. You can do whatever works for you. You can talk to your submission. You could amplify or provide some additional material to that submission, or essentially, based on your experience, and 7 years is a good time in that role, talk to us about the issues you have there. But probably the most effective way to do this would be to summarise your submission for us this morning.
Okay, to summarise the submission, we looked at basically what the draft report was saying and talking about point by point adopting more effective ways to deal with offending. We were happy to look at more non-custodial sentences wherever that wouldn't compromise community safety. We're aware that a lot of people are living in fear and that there's a high incidence of youth crime especially, but most of that is property crime in our community. We believe that that's, as violence is not involved, that probably allows a fair scope to allow people to do things like community service, home detention, or be sent off to drug or alcohol rehabilitation. We certainly support a more victim-focused system, including restorative justice and restitution. We believe that the scope of criminal offences should be reduced where there's no obvious victim, for example, with non-payment of fines or low-level drug offences. In the second point, breaking the cycle of reoffending, we support better coordination, accountability to effect more successful rehabilitation and reintegration of prisoners into the community. We'd like to see more professional case management. We understand from discussions that were held here in Mount Isa that in some cases it was prison officers that were doing some of the case management. We didn't think that sounded like the most effective way to be doing that, especially as it was highlighted that overcrowding in the prison system meant that prison officers may be moved around at short notice, changing shifts and whatnot, and may not be available to the prisoners that they're supposed to be supporting. We thought that there should be a removal of unnecessary restrictions on work release orders if that would lead to improved rehabilitation. We also think that rehabilitation should be the primary goal of prison facilities and support things like early rehab, early access to rehab, completion of rehab before release, not mixing low security and high security prisoners, and maintaining better connection of prisoners to their community. We've looked long and hard at, for example, the Indigenous horsemanship program as a way to deal with young Indigenous offenders in the community. We understand that young Indigenous men especially are probably committing the bulk of the, as we said, property crime, and we thought that this particular program, which is run by Indigenous groups that have been trying to get funding for some years now, and is supported by groups like Amnesty International in their bid to try and reduce incarceration rates. Something like taking people out onto properties and giving them some actual skills in something they're interested in would be a good first step, even if it was done as a trial and, properly evaluated and see if it works. But I think that the Indigenous community should be given a chance to solve their own problems in the way that they see fit. To point 3, reducing interactions with the criminal justice system. We did make a point of saying that there were opportunities but lack of funding to teach life skills to at-risk families. And I'd go slightly off my presentation there, or our submission there, and just state that my experience, even before I was working at the Neighbourhood Centre, I spent a year in a homelessness service and as team leader of a youth service, Reconnect it's called, funded by the federal government. And what we were finding with the youth was that they were actually enjoying the idea of being incarcerated. Some of them considered it as an opportunity for like an initiation. You're a real man now, you've been off to the big house. And others, the bulk, were expressing attitudes that they were having their needs met. There were things to do in prison. They were getting 3 meals a day. They were getting a hot shower, clean clothes and a comfortable bed, and actually telling our youth workers that those were things that they wanted and that they weren't getting at home. So I guess I want to really reinforce that point, that just the lack of routines, management of budgets, regular meals, having the electricity on so that people, or the gas so that people can have a hot shower, the electricity on so that people can have access to air conditioning in our extreme climate. All of these things seem to be contributing to an attitude amongst particularly the Indigenous youth that they, would prefer jail to their own homes. So, and that's a really, really sad thing to have to say, but we believe that there's scope for prevention in trying to work with those families on those basic issues. And I've listed a bunch of, life skills type courses and things that we have done in the past, but which we no longer have the funding to do. As a Neighbourhood Centre, most of us are only funded for 1 point something full-time staff or full-time equivalent staff, so 1 full-timer and a part-timer. And mostly these things are just not feasible to try and run these types of programs with the funding that we have. And I'm not prepared to speak for other services, but, I'd like to think that if people wanted help and could, avail themselves of childcare or transport to get themselves to courses like this, that those would at least be on offer. Public transport is a significant barrier. We only have taxis in town. It's extremely expensive and people will not walk in the 43-degree heat, or they try not to. We had discussions with experts in their field. Now, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I am told that there is difficulty in obtaining diagnosis for fetal alcohol syndrome and other disabilities, possibly because of our remoteness. I understand some training's been done recently by the health services into the FAST issue, but there are other, issues about how to assess Indigenous kids. They seem to score, it's seemingly quite smart kids seem to score quite low on things like IQ tests. I think that the test, what people are saying is that the tests need to be more culturally appropriate to truly measure the intelligence of those young people. We have an issue with lead poisoning in town where nobody's really sure of the scope of it, I don't think. I wouldn't like to say I'm any sort of expert on it, but there is lead generally through the town, regardless of whether we had a mine or not. It's present in the soil and in the dust. And perhaps having a mine adds to the amount that people are exposed to. My experience has been that the Lead Alliance in town is very keen to tell people what they can do about lead, but not why, and that a public health message probably should be motivating people first and then telling them what to do. Now, the motivation would be to tell people the sorts of brain damage or lower IQ that can result of particularly children being exposed to lead, and leading to them making poorer choices later in life. That's long-term brain damage, it's permanent brain damage. And it's not just about exposure. There's many things that people can do to reduce absorption of lead. So it's one thing for a child to put lead into its mouth by, chewing on a toy for babies and toddlers, or playing in the dirt, or not washing their hands before they eat. That's one thing. But what we need to understand in our community is that a child with an empty stomach will absorb 7 times more of the lead that they'd ingested into their bloodstream because they're hungry. So trying to get our Indigenous folk to understand how lead works, the fact that you get it into your system and then whether you actually absorb it into your blood. This is a complicated issue, and it requires culturally appropriate messaging, and it requires a willingness to say out loud that lead will cause brain damage. Now, there's reluctance to do that in the community. We don't want to scare away people who want to come here for work, or tourists, or anyone else. But I think probably we have to bite the bullet on this and accept that this is possibly related to what's going on in some of the households. And regular meals is not a thing that we observe in a lot of our clientele. Now, there's possibly 3,000 Aboriginal people living in Mount Isa. I don't want to speak badly about them. I hold them in the highest respect, and I work very closely with them. But we do see, and in programs that we've run in the past, we do see children going to school without breakfast, and we're aware that they are not bringing lunches. So these children are possibly ingesting a great deal of lead. To point 3.3, young people not being safe in their own homes. We understand that there are children wandering the street at night. We know that some of them are getting into mischief. We understand that some are simply out because they are not safe in their own house. We understand that in the past the police have picked them up and taken them to the watch house for their own safety because there was no other alternative. Now, we really, really strongly urge that be changed. And I understand the Queensland Government made an announcement about some sort of diversion this week. But the other points, apart from a place to take them, was to have a night patrol that is culturally appropriate and to be fully funded, which the Indigenous community have been strongly asking for and state that they have had before, and it was defunded. And apart from some sort of safe house at night, somewhere for rest and recovery for children who have used substances. So in the past we've had problems with sniffing of various substances, and I understand now they're reporting children as young as 8 that may have smoked marijuana that are out on the street. We don't think that they should be exposed to the criminal justice system or criminals or getting used to being in the lockup at young ages. So we think that, I can only congratulate the government on the announcement this week. I've talked more there about universal systems of health and education, public transport once again, so that people can access education and go to work. Excuse me. Cultural safety for children, being able to choose the school that they prefer rather than having to go to the nearest one in their sort of zone. Mount Isa is quite unique in that a number of Indigenous communities have been settled here, apart from the Kalkadoon people, the traditional owners. Some of those groups historically do not get along, and they've all been forced, well, many of them have been forced into social housing in one area, namely Pioneer or the surrounding areas of that. When they're then forced to go to school with these groups they don't get along with, that makes things even worse. So it's really not my opinion, it's their opinion that more should be done to try and facilitate safety for those young children going to school. Also talked about childcare. There is a shortage of that, and it does cost too much. So we'd like to see these families engaging in employment and training, doing something with their lives, and have hope that they can achieve those things. There have been issues to point 3.5 about police. I do get Indigenous women come to talk to me on a fairly regular basis about what's going on. They do feel that they are racially profiled. I understand that Chris Mitchell from the police is working hard on issues through the Community Connect program, that's separate consultation. Probably that's outside of your scope, so I'll leave that one there. Except to say that we need to have more positive interactions between police and young Indigenous people for them to respect the law and hopefully stay out of the justice system. And finally, we do support a better decision-making architecture. I would like to see an independent body. By this way, this isn't just my submission alone. This has been approved by my executive of my management committee. We're a small charity, of course. And we do want to focus more on rehabilitation, greater focus on victims, and evidence-based approaches which are depoliticised with a focus on community safety. To just highlight the experience that we have here, our service is non-targeted, and I just want to explain that there are a number of services in Mount Isa, quite a lot in fact, and most of them are targeted at one issue, like domestic violence or mental health or whatever, or they're targeted at a group like youth or homeless people, for example. Being non-targeted, we think that we may see a broader scope of people across the board. The types of services that we offer are emergency relief, so we're seeing a lot of the economic disadvantage where people are coming in for food vouchers or fuel vouchers. We also offer a no-interest loan scheme, so we see quite a lot of people there that have been, for generations, the households have been on Centrelink benefits and can't save to buy basic furniture or household appliances. So we see quite a lot of, we get quite in-depth with doing budgets and loan applications with them for that. So that's where kind of a lot of the experience that we have comes from. And just to my background, I initially had a Bachelor of Business and did a Master of Social Science in International Development. So I'm kind of, my specialty is more in third world countries, but we've kind of got a third world country in our own country, if you understand what I mean with our Indigenous folk. That's about all I have to say. So are there any questions?
Thanks, Chris. Between Commissioner Frederick and myself, we will have some questions, and we, if we have time, we'll ask the group here whether there are any comments based on what you've said today. Bronwyn, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, just hi Chris, it's Bronwyn speaking. With regards to, you mentioned in some cases, corrections do the case management and then other groups are taking on other kinds of services. So I'm just wondering, from your organisation's perspective, and even your personal perspective as a worker with the organisation, who may be best placed to address some of the problems that you highlighted? Is it like private industry, volunteer groups, community-based NGOs, even local government in terms of the council there, or state or federal agencies? Who do you think is best placed to address some of those issues you've mentioned?
Within the correction facilities, I think I was kind of imagining government employees as like social workers or trained professionals, at least like a Cert 4 in community services or something like that.
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Yeah, but even in such like looking at those people, if you're saying about, removal of unnecessary restrictions or looking at time reductions in times, or there could be people on corrective orders who are in community. Who do you think would be best placed to manage some of those individuals? Just seeking your
community?
Yeah.
I kind of have a bit of a philosophical approach to corrections, that I would like to see it in-house of government as an actual public service. And that's because I've seen that there's kind of this thing called the prison industrial complex or something that's been developing around the world, where it's become a for-profit activity for some organisations to promote more imprisonment, more custodial sentences. I don't know if you understand me.
Yeah, because they perceive
I'm trying to elaborate on a thought that I had, but I don't want people making profit out of other people's misery. And even though I do work in community services, my personal goal and our organisation's sort of stated goal is we actually want to do ourselves out of business.
No, you make sense. You do make sense in terms of conflicts of interest, and that they could be compromised in that regard.
Yeah, if people were paid on the basis of how many cases they had, they'd be reluctant to let them go. That type of thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, it's Kim Wood. I attended the forum in Isa several weeks ago, and I'd have to say I've never been anywhere where there was such a single-minded focus on addressing the issues that face kids as the primary catalyst there.
And my primary goal was to speak to. Hello, you still there?
Yeah.
I think I might be losing battery. Especially the Indigenous community were united in their voice, but I felt that probably a lot of them wouldn't have the ability to put a formal submission, and I just wanted to add to their voice. So, with all respect to the traditional owners, etc.
You've done a great job. I walked away from Isa well aware of the terms of reference of our inquiry, but there are some issues that look really basic that won't necessarily result in recommendations from us that might make a profound difference up there, and they are as simple as lack of public transport, which are reflected. An Indigenous mum talked about the difficulty in getting one of her children to a school, and I think you've explained why she'd chosen a school on the other side of town. Food programs, and there's some really fairly basic issues that look like...
Well, if we wanted to go right back to the core of the problem, we're talking about social and economic disadvantage.
Yes.
We know where it is. We've actually, I hate to say it, we can call it a concentrated area of social and economic disadvantage in Pioneer, or we could name for, the day-to-day vernacular is a ghetto. We're not just generation upon generation of people have experienced this disadvantage. They actually don't know how to live in our society, I'm saying the non-Indigenous society. They look all around and they see people like them where no one, all up and down their street, no one has been to work.
Chris, it sounds like...
and if we could get the stats, and we probably, I can't, but probably you can, if we went right back to the grassroots, we would know that our criminal element mostly comes from that social and economic disadvantage, where there are all these issues in those houses of alcoholism, of domestic and family violence, of these children living very, very insecure lives and not having their basic needs met, basic attachment issues, if you want to go back to the root of psychology. If we could address the social and economic disadvantage and have people having basic things like transport, I feel that a lot of the other issues would disappear, and the need for big big expenditures on new prisons in the next 5 years would be unnecessary. I recognise the Queensland Government knows that some of these issues are generational issues, and they've got a plan out to at least 2030, and so they know how hard the work is, and they seem to know the money that needs to be spent on it. But, when I first arrived in Mount Isa in 2011, someone did a community survey, a study from Centacare, and found about 35 commuter buses around town, all been funded probably by something like the Gambling Community Benefit Fund, but nobody having enough funding to fund a driver full-time to go around and help those people. And we did a viability study last year of whether we could use our bus and just provide a basic service. But there were all these barriers of red tape and bureaucracy and insurance, and could we provide a service to a non-client or a non-member? Our tax accountant told us we had to have, we had to join people up as members of our organisation in order to give them a lift. Otherwise, we'd have some sort of tax implication.
Chris, I can hear the
that we
frustration.
couldn't afford.
There's some potentially simple solutions which give me some optimism about some of the issues you articulate. Look, I've got another question for you. I know that people typically, when they're incarcerated, are sent away from Isa because there's no prison there, and it is somewhat a badge of honour with some young people. But you also talked about the opportunities of better connection of prisoners to community. Given the imprisonment is not in Isa, but it's elsewhere, and perhaps it's an attractive option for some of the young kids, what would better connection to community look like? How could we help that? How could we improve it?
I think that what the community talks about is things like a local healing centre, to recognise that these children aren't criminals. There actually is something wrong with them usually. If we could put them into a place where they could reconnect to their culture, still be visited by their family regularly, maybe be diagnosed before they're sent off to prison. That was one of the issues that the community was very angry about, that children often, or young people often ended up in prison and then got a diagnosis and found that they actually had a disability, a permanent disability, that they couldn't kind of help their behaviour, that they probably just need medication like Ritalin or something. It seems like it's just an enormous waste to send them off to these places so far away where when they come back they're strangers, to their family. Their families can't call them. I think there are very strict limitations on them being able to call their family. And our experience with things like running small loans, we know how chaotic some of these households are for them to be able to hang on to the same phone from week to week and the same phone number. So I can see how these kids could get kind of lost and not be able to contact their family from prison. If they were here and could actually be visited, is what the local community really wants.
Thanks, Chris.
If not here, it's somewhere reasonably close.
Thank you. We had a compelling presentation on FASD at our consultation in Cairns earlier this week. It sounds like there is some good science, and there's certainly some people in Australia that are well engaged and working well. And it was really compelling, and it just showed the sadness of putting FASD-affected people in prison and treating them as criminals and not having effective programs to manage them. Is that an issue in Isa? Is fetal alcohol syndrome, an issue there as it is in other places?
Oh, look, people say it is. Yes, I believe it is.
Okay.
But I would add to that we have a more unique situation with the lead, and we do not know how to measure that, how to find out if a child has had a high blood lead level concentration in childhood, somewhere between the age of, say, 0 and 7, or even in the womb, and then what happens on into early adulthood, possible contact with the criminal justice system, and then once they're in there, it seems unlikely that they're going to be able to learn a new way because their brain is so affected that they're simply incapable.
Yeah,
they're going to need a lifetime of support, in other words.
Yeah, or the mother had issues with the lead and then it was in utero. So, I mean, we're going to just conclude there, Chris. I'm going to just swing to the floor. and see if there's any comments from any of the people here in the public. And we do have some. So it's just comments, Chris. It's not actually questions to you, but we do give people the opportunity to comment on your presentation. Yes, please identify who you are and where you're from. Thank you.
Thank you. Wayne Sanderson, Balanced Justice Campaign, and I'm Vice President of ANTAR Queensland as well. Chris, I appreciated hearing from you about the challenges faced in engaging with young Indigenous kids for whom home might not be a safe place, and others too, for all sorts of related reasons. I'm wondering, is there anything coming out of the Family Responsibilities Commission that happened on Cape York, 5 Cape York communities, led by Commissioner David Glasgow? But the reason I'm raising it here is that it seemed to me that a lot of the skills development and accomplishment in local, authentic Indigenous workers that was built up there might be transferable to some extent into the sort of situation that you are dealing with there. Just a thought for now. Of course, we're going to hear a lot from David Glasgow, I think in Townsville next week, and that might be of real value.
Thank you, Wayne. Anyone else that's here in the audience today? No.
Chris, that ends your time presenting. Look, you did a wonderful job. The Mount Isa situation is both sad, it's compelling. As I said, I think there's some reason for hope and optimism. And look, we thank you for the good work you're doing. Keep it up, and we need good people like you doing these things in tough places.
Well, thank you very much too for your time and for listening.
Thanks,
Thank you, Chris. We're going to end the line now.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.